and satisfy your needs in parched places, and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. And we might say, even though it's not written there, that we might be restorers of the whole planet, as stewards, as repairers. Now, St. Francis is one of our leaders in repairing breaches, and not just between human beings, certainly between the wolf and St. Francis. Trying to resolve conflicts with the hierarchy. Trying to heal the earth. So in many senses, if Francis has done what he was to do, what's your job? What's your job? I'm reminded by the teaching of a bishop in New York a long time ago. Before we had hardly any deacons, when we had hardly any deacons, he often ended the liturgy by saying, "Get up, get out, and get lost." And get lost in the work you have to do. Paul Moore. This session, we're going to have a flying tour through some examples and some possibilities, and I expect that you're going to have lots and lots of other ideas. Now, I don't know if any of you saw this story in late September. Jason is the man's name. It's a Latino translation for the word we know as Jason. What does it mean? Healer. Jason met and made friends with a baby squirrel when he was still in Venezuela, and then he became a migrant. He named this little squirrel Nico, who was his companion on the journey. He stopped in Colombia for a while, where he found that the squirrel had a sliver in its eye. And he kept Nico with him and brought him to the border. He found fruits and pine trees for the squirrel to eat, even when Jason went without. He spent 6 months in a migrant camp in Matamoros. And late last month, about to enter the United States, he's likely, I don't know whether he got across the border or not, but he couldn't take the squirrel with him, at least not legally. But people have been trying to help him get across the border. These are commensals. What does that word mean? Commensal. Mensa, table. At the table, we eat together. It's what we do at Eucharist. That is what we've been doing several times already today, yesterday. We are commensals. I wonder what it means to think about how we eat together with other parts of creation, non-human. How we are fed. I'm reading a fascinating book about mycorrhizae. Do you know what a lichen is? What's a lichen composed of? An alga and a fungus. Mycorrhizae are very similar. And they penetrate the whole of the earth. thousands and thousands of miles of them, millions of miles of them. Feeding and eating. What's there? I mentioned this book yesterday, and it appears to me, there's a copy here if you want to look at it. It appears to me that it's filled with opportunities for lament, for healing, and it might be a very useful book in a parish book study. I think it's filled with hope in the face of what we're talking about. There are a couple of dozen essays, and I would encourage you to think about how you are gathering the flock to lament and rebuild and heal creation. Mitakwe Oyasin is Lakota or Dakota for all my relatives, all my relations. What we talked about yesterday, in the understanding that we are all related. We can't be unrelated to anybody, even if we want to be. All our relations, human and squirrel. In most indigenous traditions, the animals you hunt and human beings, we're all related. This is actually a video that's a remarkable piece. Talks about community-based public safety. The members of the tribe, in some circumstances, people like that would be called the elders, even if they're young, because they're wise. They share the responsibility for guarding the community, for responding to inappropriate actions, and guiding people back onto a more productive path. It could be called community policing, but in a very different sense than what Anglo culture usually does. We lock people up. Sometimes they get some human remediation, and other times they're just locked up, like animals. I've been to a couple of different Lakota gatherings as part of Niobrara congregation. Any of you aware of that? Yes? Okay, good. In the summer, for many, many years, the peoples of Nakota and Dakota and Lakota ancestry gather to pray, to have fellowship, to worship, and to remember the ancestors, and to look forward. The great center post of their spirituality is Mitakwe Oyasin. We are all related. Now, let me ask you to think about your neighborhood. Where are you discovering or recognizing this word we used yesterday, solastalgia? The pain, the angst about what's happening with the earth. Where are you helping other people to name that? Where are you seeing and finding injustice? Deacons among us, I think that's a diaconal role, to announce the breach that needs to be repaired. Who is our neighbor? Is it the heron on the beach? Is it the wasp in the cottage? How is another part of creation a neighbor? And I'd love to hear some responses. Who is our neighbor? Who is your neighbor?
I live in a town of 300, and with a very, very long history. And there is a higher percentage of cancer here than in most places in the world. And the other day I was visiting someone who has been living with that for a very long time. And I just said, boy, there's sure a lot of cancer around here, which we do say a lot. And she said, yeah, there is. And she talked about living in that house for the last 50, 60, 70 years, and living across the street from soybean fields that were being constantly flown over with chemicals, and now her husband would be out in the field, and the chemicals would even fly over when he was there. And you know, the owner of that field is a big, wonderful guy I know in my church and her church, and we're all completely related, and I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying it's a real, neighbors are a real life and death situation where I live, and it's a harrowing story.
Thank you for naming it. We can't do anything until we name it. Who's your neighbor?
I live in Norfolk, and I live right near the Elizabeth River, which is tidal, and we have severe flooding. And it's not lost on me that the condo I live in is before you get to the seawall. So I'm glad I rent. And we're having lots of conversations in Norfolk about the Army Corps of Engineers who are putting in more walls and more pumps, and I think that maybe there's wisdom there, but they're also building luxury apartments that go out over the river, and the tides are our neighbor. I can't move the moon and change the tides, only God can, and so I wonder, rather than fighting them, how can we learn to live with our neighbor, the tides, and if they're rising, that's also our neighbor.
Amen. And there are creative ways to re-foster marshes and wetlands that slow all that stuff down. Who's your neighbor, Bishop?
So I never thought that I would talk about these creatures as being my neighbors, but I want to talk about two. I detest spiders, and Gareth knows that when I come to Chenko, he needs to go through the manor house and make sure that there are not spiders. I was very proud this morning, and I walked out of the Spirit Center and saw a spider on the floor out there. I didn't step on it, because I do recognize that there's a connection of some sort. The other thing is, I don't like dandelions. Dandelions are weeds. But what I learned on the farm is that when they're present, it's because their roots are going deep and they're trying to rejuvenate. They're bringing up nutrients that the ground needs. And so the dandelions need to be left alone. I'm not kidding you not. There was one year when I lived in South Bend, Indiana, that I went out with some Roundup and put Roundup on all of the dandelions in my front yard, and the next day I looked out the window and had brown spots on my lawn, which was awful, but so I didn't do that again. But the other experience that I had is one day out in my backyard. I forget the name of the weed, but I saw this weed that needed to be pulled from the garden, and right as I went to pull it, I saw some bees pollinating, and suddenly I remembered my children alerting me to how the bee population is dying off because that can't get access to good pollen. And suddenly I felt this connection to the bees, and I left the weeds in the garden. So I don't know, this might not be what you were looking for, but I definitely would stand up and say, I feel connected to other living creatures as neighbors that I never thought I'd be saying.
Thank you. Yes.
One day or late spring in May, I looked outside very early in the morning and I saw a baby deer. But when I say baby deer, very little, just born that day. And it was incredible. And my sister was staying with us, and so I woke them up like Christmas morning of, look, there's the baby, it's the baby deer. And so we all got out of bed really excited, going from window to window, following this fragile deer, learning how to walk. And we were so excited that it could hear us. And it got startled, and the mom just stopped and ran away. And we were traumatized by, oh no, what have we just done? And it just reminded me of the connection that we have, that even if we think we're, in our house, nobody can hear us, that we are just so, that wall is very thin. The mom came back, all is well, and we feel much ownership over the deer whenever we saw it coming back and forth later that year. But our neighbors are the deers.
Thank you.
Well, back to hurricanes that made islands that take them away. I'm always pay attention because I live in a retirement center on the road. But they recharge our aquifers. And so when one came, Isabel, years ago, and put a tree through my house, I had to think real hard about the aquifers. But another thing, because I live in a retirement center, they're chaplains for all the residents. But I ride the elevators a lot because I'm on 12 and the staff. Oh, some of the dear people work 2 jobs. And as I was sharing yesterday with somebody, I'll get on the elevator early in the morning and they'll be leaning against the wall, trying to get it together to go to their second job. It's hard.
Thank you. Thank you for naming those parallel realities. In the back, great, Roy.
I have a reality from the same residence, but Nancy has to keep this to herself. When I moved into this retirement community, I was invited to join a group of men who were all single, who had moved in the past year and a half. And you can't wear hats in the dining room, but if you could, they might have red hats on. And when I first started going to this, I was wincing internally at the direction of the conversation by a population that I think spends a lot of time in front of Fox News. But over time, one of them was in an elevator one day, the one with the most difficult comments during dinners. And I said, "How are you?" And he said he had just learned of some very serious health condition that he had that was going to change the way he lives. And I spoke with another one at breakfast one day, and he started carrying an oxygen tank with him, and said that he had done something stupid and fallen, and that's why he needed the oxygen tank. He died a week ago. We are all related, is the point of the story. And I savor those times at the table, even if I do not savor a good bit of the conversation.
Thank you for recognizing the created potential in each person you honored. Thank you. Yes.
I was thinking about the animal connection, and most of you probably heard the story about, when you see a cardinal, it's almost, I guess, like an old wives' tale or something, that if you see a red cardinal in your yard, that somebody from heaven is sending you a message or something. And as most of you know, my parents passed this summer. And during that time, there was a red cardinal that would be, when I would open my back door to let my dog out, they would be sitting right there in the tree. If I went out the front door, they would be sitting right there on the tree. As I was going through this, and then thinking about that was that kind of a connection with animal life, and that they were kind of there, and it was like when they passed, I never saw the bird, the cardinal was gone.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Olivia?
I walk around Norfolk often. That's my hometown. I love that place. I have regularly walked from, you might not know, if you're not from Norfolk, you won't know, but I've walked from Ocean View to where I live to downtown, like Norfolk, where I've worked before. And I go along the roads, and I like to walk because I try not to use my car as much as I can. It's not easy in an area where cars are needed. But I noticed that you need to see, you have to foster a relationship with the natural world around you, and there's not a lot of access to the natural world for a large part of our population. It is a very dangerous, like I walk on Tidewater, and it is not paved, it does not have a sidewalk everywhere. Virginia Beach doesn't have any sidewalks, just so you know, Virginia Beach is not my favorite place. It's not popular opinion.
But they're your neighbor.
We were talking about that last night. What was that?
But they're your neighbor.
They're my neighbor. They need sidewalks. There's some sort of but just what I just noticed is that there's not a lot. There's also our lives in Norfolk and Virginia Beach are dependent so much on water and like how we like cross over them. Like Norfolk has so many roads that don't go north, south, or east, west. And because there are so many waterways to cross. But I noticed that, yes, I know where Tidewater is, I know Granby, I know Brampton, I know like where my bridges are on Hampton Boulevard, but what I don't really know is how Norfolk looks like from the water because access to the water is so privatized. And that's a shame, I think.
Thank you. There's an opportunity in that. California, years ago, I think, made significant parts of the coast public. And Oregon has worked hard at that too, of allowing access everywhere. All right, I'm going to shift to what other ways in which we might engage the solastalgia that's around us. That's the video, and I will share the slide deck with you, and it's got the information if you want to watch it. All right, we're going to talk about energy. I think the prime issue is to shift away from fossil fuel sources to renewable energy. Starting with solar, you can put panels on your roof and pay for a significant part of your annual energy budget.
And they can be cross-shaped. How delightful.
They can also be hosted, the panels can also be hosted on parking structures or shade structures. That's a big issue in the desert part of this country, but you can put them in many places. They even work in the Arctic. They're usable almost everywhere. Okay, wind. Now this is a new technology, believe it or not. Shipping costs are significant enough that some ship companies are reintroducing wind technology. Those two tall things are sails that can be closed. And wind-powered or wind-assisted global shipping constitutes 3% of our emissions, mostly from heavy fuel oil. Each one of those sails replaces about 30% of the ship's fuel use. 1.5 tons a day. There's another company that's deploying kites at about 1,000 feet up, where there's a lot of energy up there, and it can reduce propulsion, fuel use by about 40%. These are very new ideas, but they're also very old ideas. Geothermal. Some of you will remember that General Seminary in the middle of New York City started drilling geothermal wells in 2006. After Sandy, the big storm, Sandy superstorm damaged some of those wells, but they're still providing significant heat exchange. And the General Seminary geothermal field is the biggest one around New York City, which I find absolutely stunning in the midst of, downtown New York. Hydropower. We've, for many eons, gotten power from water wheels, things like that, in rivers and streams. But this is an idea for battery storage, basically. When you've got lots of extra energy, you pump the water up into a holding basin, or a lake, and then you open the gates when you need electricity. It's much more efficient than batteries. And you can also transport water uphill with a dynamic ram. Okay, this one, electric vehicles. Last year in Norway, 80% of new cars were electric. You want to know why? The taxes on ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, went way up. So it was cheaper to buy an electric car. Other incentives were free tolls, free parking for electric cars, tax exemptions, and lower taxes on zero-emission cars. Norway also has electric ferries. I have never before seen one other than in Norway, but they're leaders in this work. What else? Fusion. Lawrence Livermore made some more significant progress in fusion energy than they did last July, and they're going to make this happen. Hydrogen-fueled cars and heavy trucks, particularly for industrial uses, together with carbon capture and storage. Believe it or not, aircraft are beginning to use hydrogen fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, which means basically they get it from plants rather than fossil fuels. They make fuel from growing plants. And there are a couple of airports that are now offsetting all of their direct emissions. So things are coming. Okay, as stewards of the garden, I'm going to remind you that we're all charged to bind up our loins and get to work. Brownfields. This is in Hampton, Virginia. Do you know what brownfields are? Contaminated soils, basically, that have to be remediated in order to build on them or use them. They can be reclaimed, sometimes fairly quickly. It depends on what the pollutants are. They can be repurposed for housing or schools or parks. This is one in Richmond. That's what it looked like at the beginning of the 20th century, or a little earlier, Civil War era. Lots of munitions plants there during the Civil War. To master planned remediation of brownfields for housing and leisure. As stewards of the garden, We're really charged to reclaim and renew the earth. I'm going to back up. Wrong one. We can foster sustainable agriculture on brownfields. We can plant cover crops. We can partner with indigenous communities around managing forests. Canoga Camp and Conference Center in North Carolina is beginning to partner with the Eastern Cherokee Band to learn more about their understanding of the ecosystem there. I imagine that there are at least some remnant indigenous communities here in your neighborhood. There's another opportunity to learn something of what they know about stewarding creation. Okay. Recycling and reusing. I would encourage you to go to this website, your website in Virginia, and look at what they have to say about programs, including recycling. I think recycling is an orphan in many ways. Municipalities, governments put out rules for how to recycle, but they don't go far enough, and they don't encourage. For example, a couple of people have talked about plastic recycling. We could do far more with it. Most of it still goes in the garbage and gets lost. Okay. We can advocate for better recycling programs, and I think that's a great diaconal ministry to go prod the legislators to do better work.
On.
Okay, great. We can, I'm going to back up again, sorry. Electronics recycling. My husband's part of a Lions Club that gathers used electronics, mostly to provide laptops and computers to poor school children. And they teach them how to do it. They reprogram the hard drive with Linux, and then they teach them how to use the computers. But they also will take any kind of electronics that are past their usable lifetime. They sell the e-waste, and the funds that they receive for it help them to buy the other pieces of the computers that the kids need. So it's a remarkable kind of ministry. Repurposing e-waste is another challenge, but they're getting better at recycling. There's a company south of Reno in Nevada that does the same thing for batteries. Separate the minerals, the metals in the batteries and reuse them. And it's one of the most innovative processes that we're beginning to hear about. Okay, recycling. Copenhagen has little recycling centers, yes, about glass and cans and paper, but also about household items that are still usable, but people don't normally have easy access to. It's a community center, a small one, with a little cupboard for books, one for dishes, one for blankets, one for furniture, that kind of thing. It's a remarkable resource that's publicly organized and locally stewarded. There's a possibility for that kind of thing almost anywhere. So you don't have to go and buy what you need, and it gets used.
Is there a question?
Yes.
I was going to offer, I belong to a Buy Nothing group on Facebook, and they're neighborhood based, and they're all over. And so you basically, if you have something that you can't use, you can offer it up. You can put a wish out for something that you want, and people have been, it actually forms a great community of generosity in your local neighborhood. And so they're everywhere. Almost every neighborhood has a Buy Nothing group that you can apply to belong to on Facebook, is how they're mostly run. And it's just been a wonderful course, a blessing and a way to get rid of stuff that I don't want to throw in the trash.
That's wonderful. Would you write something for the diocesan newsletter about that?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Thank you. That's a remarkable resource. We can compost. Some jurisdictions have a shared composting possibility. You can put it, in some communities, you put a bucket out once a week like you do your recycling or your garbage. Others will pick it up, please.
Yes, there's Tidewater Compost. There are some drop-off locations, or there's also a pickup service to keep your food scraps out of the trash.
Right, right. In Reno, there's a bicycle composting service on the flat part of the city. And they do it, and then you can come and pick up your fertilizer for your garden. Okay, other parts of this reusing is about water use. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Conserving water and planting xeriscapes, that's X-E-R-I, dryscapes. Around here, that's probably not so necessary. But there are drought-like environments in some places around here. You live right by the sea, yes?
For natives, native plants that, and it's things which grow naturally, they don't need external water.
Right.
And there are places and things all over Southside Virginia that you don't have to, most of my yard is clover. And I put this much water on it, and it's nice and green and lush. And it's stuff which just occurs naturally. And that's something we can do. And, even at church, there's 3 acres of grassland, which is just whatever grows back there grows.
And it's much healthier for the soil and the air. Clover rejuvenates the soil. Yes, there.
I live in Old Town Portsmouth, and the street I live on is an experiment for the city with bioretention areas. And so to deal with drainage and flooding, all of the hill strips are now being replaced with special drains and all native plants and grasses that help absorb the water and keep it from running off into the Elizabeth River.
Hallelujah. Challenge in some communities is that there are regulations about what you can plant and what you can't plant. Sometimes where we live, you can't plant a vegetable garden. You can put it in pots, but you can't use the land for that, which is really odd. But they want the community to look similar or cohesive. There are opportunities for challenging the regulations, political advocacy, really. Yeah.
I just paid the fine.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right, recharging. Electric vehicles, but also the tools you use. There are electric alternatives for all sorts of ice machines, combustion engine machines, and lots of communities are outlawing leaf blowers that use gasoline and snow blowers. I haven't heard a community actually regulate that, but snow blowers, electric snow blowers are great. You can charge up the batteries in about 40 minutes. And go out there and do it again. I did all last winter. Internet access, I think, is a piece of this that's also a justice issue and a connection issue. How do you find out about Facebook and the no-buy stuff if you don't have adequate access to connectivity? And we are connected in that way. It's a tool. Okay. Recharge also includes returning water to aquifers. We've talked about this, but landscaping and construction can aid that kind of work. Rain gardens, green roofs, Anybody around here have a green roof? Planting stuff on your roof like the Heidi chalets? I'm serious.
There's a business in downtown Norfolk that has a green roof.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Green walls, planted walls, permeable paving. Lots of communities are beginning to require that in new construction so that it just doesn't run off the asphalt into the street. And we talked about sustaining and protecting wetlands, and they're remarkably important carbon sinks. And human recharging. Why we are here. There's a monastic model that says moderation in all things. As my father used to say, moderation in all things, including moderation. Okay? There is a time for feasting and a time for refraining. We can designate wild places and urban wildlands for native plants and beneficial insects where you don't have them on your living room floor. Even small patches of native forest can sustain and support the larger ecosystem. Remarkably small plots. You are so blessed to have this traditional forest in this place, but many communities can't do that. Some of you probably know about a practice called forest bathing. Yeah. Go out and chill. That's what we're doing. So what are the justice gaps in your communities? Who's left out? Where and which creatures are suffering? And what kinds of healing are needed? Needing ourselves, our human communities, the biosphere? Responses? What are the justice gaps? What's the breach that keeps you up at night?
Where I live in downtown Suffolk, one thing that needs healing is litter.
Living.
Litter.
Litter.
Trash. Yeah, I have never lived in a community where people just so freely throw their trash out. Parking lots, next to the street, along sidewalks. For me, it's very discouraging, and I've stopped walking around in Suffolk. Same with bicycling. Just everywhere. It washes into the Nansemond River and eventually into the James. It is a sign to me that, well, it's a sign of many things, but I think one is, what we've been talking about, is just a total disconnect from creation.
I'll tell you a snarky story. I was walking down the street in New York City in a collar, going somewhere, and this guy threw a cigarette in the street, and I walked up to him and he said, "Sir, I think you dropped something." And he just, went. But how do we build connections with people? It's hard in a...
In our church, the parking lot is behind the church opens out on Saratoga Street, and there are a couple of houses back there. There's one family, literally every morning when I just live down the street, when I walk to work, there's some new trash, either right by the sidewalk where they park, or they've been in our parking lot. And, I don't know how to reach somebody and say, there are other ways to deal with this. I don't want to go on about this. I have a friend who told me the story about Lou Holtz, a famous college football coach. And he accepted a job at South Carolina as their head coach, and was having his opening introductory press conference, and somebody asked him, "Coach, what's it going to take for South Carolina to create a championship winning program?" You know what he said? He said, it's gonna take everybody in the state, it starts with everybody in the state stop littering. He said, I have never seen a place with so much trash, and until we get pride in our state, we are never gonna check the shit without the
Yeah, Genevieve.
I hear that about the littering. It is discouraging to go out and see like trash that's lying around, but I'm also like mindful that while we like as individuals probably don't like to litter or throw stuff out of our like car windows as we're driving, but we collectively put our trash into landfills or they're put onto barges and taken to other countries that and dumped there. And so our trash isn't here, but it is somewhere else. It's in the ocean, it's in like poor developing nations who are willing to like take some money from us to be able to like process our trash, which is usually just like it's standing around. I don't want to say that we should have like our trash around us, but maybe it would remind us that our trash is still out there too.
Thank you.
Genevieve mentioned this before, but I think there's a social justice and racial issue at play in this. I mean, and this is true of most places I've lived, but living in Norfolk, I see now access to green spaces are primarily in segregated white communities. In the neighborhood where my church is, parishioners encourage me to join the private pool that is almost exclusively white folks at a very, the priest salary will not cover the membership dues, at the private pool. And the other half of that is not only are we denying people the access, but we're not then giving them an opportunity to love the creation. I remember when the Trump administration cut all the funding to the national parks. I was heartbroken, and one of my seminary professors said, do you think he spent summer vacations in national parks? Where I've spent summer vacations in state parks. And so if we don't give people an opportunity to love the creation, why should they care about it?
Amen, brother.
Yes.
Amen. There? You? Yes.
The thing that keeps me up at night is Dominion Energy.
Dominion.
Dominion Energy. Just because I encounter so many people who call, who have gotten behind on their utility bill. There's one utility company where you can get your power from, and you get behind, and that's it. I mean, you're gonna lose something. And to me, the justice gap is just so great. Like what Charles is saying, that who has time to care about recycling when they can't keep the lights on or feed their children? And it strikes me that all of these things are deeply interrelated, that all of what we're talking about connects with each other. And to heal one thing, we must be healing something else simultaneously.
Yes. Let me give you an example of what's possible in addressing the energy issue. A congregation in Peoria, Illinois, has tried to build a solar array inside the city. The city fathers said no, we don't want that in our city. So they went right across the city line into the county, and they built it in the county, and it's providing energy to low-income households. And the church did it. The church did it.
Guys, we could do that.
Right. I recognize the ferment of energy and desire for conversation. I'm going to move through just a handful of more things, and hope that you will hang on to that and go and change the world. Okay? Okay, we can. What about the body of God's creation? And you have responded to that in a number of effective ways. We need to speak and act for justice in the body of God's creation. Okay, what households and congregations can do? You can, recycle, renew, reuse, repair. I think that's the mantra. Learn it and repeat it. Share it, please. Energy. You can tap solar. Roy?
I just wanted to add something to the recycle, renew, reuse, and repair that my niece would say if she were here. She runs a store in San Mateo, California, where you bring your own containers and you take what you bought home with your containers, or you can get a container there and bring it back. So she would say, stop using it. And, then you don't have to recycle it. And if you didn't buy it in the first place, you don't have to reuse it. And there's something to reducing our convenience-based consumption that her store is driving.
Amen.
I wish it were in Southern Virginia, but.
Bento boxes for lunches and, take them home and wash them. That kind of thing. Absolutely. Okay. Energy. We can tap solar. We've heard a couple of ways that way. Wind power in communities. There's a monastery of nuns in Indiana that has an enormous pylon with a windmill on it. Provides energy for the monastery and the school they foster and the local small community. We can shift from gas and other fossil fuels to renewables. We can shift furnaces, water heaters, heat pumps, maybe geothermal heat pumps. We can shift our gas cooking stoves to induction. There's been a lot of news in the last year or so about the fumes, really, from burning natural gas, not healthy. We can think about doing something other than gas-powered fireplaces. At the House of Bishops meetings for many years, we had pictures of a fire. Fireplace. Travel, we can drive electric. You can charge at home with panels on your roof, and the rates are lower at night. We can use bicycles and e-bikes. I see lots of elders driving these little tiny electric cars that park in really tiny places, and you can put enough groceries on the seat or in the small trunk and do what you need to do a lot more easily. We can plant native trees. We can eat locally and lower on the food chain. Do people understand what that means, to eat lower on the food chain? Eat plants. Eat more plants. Like those cow ads, eat chicken. Eat less meat and dairy and imported food. Compost, conserve water. Rewild empty plots or plots that are growing things that are unhelpful. Encourage pollinators. Plant a pollinator garden. We can advocate for climate justice. Don't have much of that already. And collaborate. Make a neighborhood composting pile. It'll work faster and provide more fertilizer. Okay, steward the garden creatively and consciously, and you will bring justice and restored communities to live in. Tomorrow, during the Eucharist, in place of the prayers of the people, there are going to be opportunities to gather the community, to share your intention for what you're going to do differently, how you're going to heal something that we've talked about or haven't talked about.
I think we actually may be doing that as part of the homily.
Oh, fine, whatever, tomorrow, I'm not in charge of when.
Otherwise, I'll be up late tonight trying to put together a homily.
Great, thank you. Absolutely. And you're going to be invited to share, and I will ask you to steward that.
I will absolutely be glad to do that. Thank you.
You're welcome to come and buttonhole me if you want to talk about anything we've gone over or other ideas. I'm available the rest of today and tomorrow morning. So, yeah, I can do that. This is an Ojibwe prayer from the 2009 General Convention. Ichimanidu, Great Spirit God, we give you thanks for another day on this earth. We give you thanks for this day, to enjoy the compassionate goodness of you, our Creator. We acknowledge with one mind our respect and gratefulness to all the sacred cycle of life. Bind us together in the circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and one another. Amen. I'm happy to lead some more conversation, but if you want to go create outdoors, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Bishop Katharine.